Steel and Flame, Book 1 of the Guilds of Avlaan series is available on Amazon. If you like fluffy wolf lolly protagonists and Japanese light novels, follow the link below to check it out.
Hello, Leonardo Cornejo here with another video, and today I want to talk about something that I'm interested in, that is multiverses. I know you might want me to talk about the situation with censorship, with payment processors and Steam, with the situation with the UK, or the political situation in Mexico, and I already told you I don't want to talk about politics here. You already know my opinions. You already know my position. I hate the Mexican government. I hate the British government. I strongly oppose censorship. I oppose this whole digital ID things. I strongly oppose the idea of payment processors controlling what we can and cannot do. I already have expressed my opinion on that matter before, and I don't think this is the place or the time to talk about it. I am not precisely well prepared in the matter. There are smarter people than I have been sharing their content. I have been trying to help this gain more attention, but I don't want to make a video about it. And I have plenty of topics pending, and I want to focus on writing, on entertainment, on giving people advice about writing. That's why I want to talk about multiverses, because people hate multiverses nowadays. And it's not their fault. I mean, it's not the fault of the people. But I don't think multiverses are, by just existing, the source of this problem. I think the problem is more complex, and it has to do with bad writing, with authors who are not very competent, who are not very smart, doing things they shouldn't do, and one of those is trying to be smarter, to pretend being smarter than they actually are. And that's one problem I have with the whole multiverse thing. One of the biggest problems is how they treat characters. When I write, I treat characters as individuals. I try to not treat characters as, how do I say it, interchangeable, as disposable. There's a reason why I avoid killing characters off. There's a reason why I avoid doing things that will ruin or destroy a character entirely. Because they are not disposable, they are not replaceable. And that's the problem with how the West handles multiverses, because there are many works which have been successful and they and they are good and respected, made in Japan, which handle multiverses too. For example, Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy isn't just one universe. In fact, every part of the mainline series is its own universe. For example, you have Final Fantasy 1, 2 and 3, they are a different universe. 4, 5 and 6, a different universe. 6, 7 and 8, 7, 8 and 9, a different universe. And they are not necessarily interconnected. The situation in which they were interconnected, it was basically like a crossover game, but they are a separate universe. And here's the important part. Each game has its own universe with recurring themes and even recurring characters. You can do recurring characters, they just can't be entirely identical and interchangeable. For example, you have characters like Mog and Sid, which appear repeatedly. You have different versions of Mog and Sid, but they are not interchangeable. You have, for example, in Final Fantasy 12, Sid isn't even one of the secondary characters helping the protagonist. He is one of the antagonists. Dr. Sid is a villain. He's the bad guy. More of a math scientist. He doesn't really mean to cause that much harm, but he's on the enemy side, and he doesn't reform or anything. No, he goes crazy. He basically goes crazy and dies. And that's the version of Sid in that Final Fantasy, and in most of them before Final Fantasy 12. Sid was helping the protagonist. He was a I think in 6 he was an engineer who helped the protagonist, and here he's a mad scientist who is basically trying to kill the leads because for the sake of his own agenda. And he's insane. He's literally insane because he contacted an ancient god and he went crazy. And that's the thing. It's not the same character and it's not interchangeable. You can't bring the seed of one universe to another. And Mog, which is generally a little bit more consistent in behavior as a character, is not interchangeable one version with another. Sometimes they don't even look the same. In most cases they don't even look the same because they are not interchangeable. They are just like a trope or a theme rather than a character. And that's something I like. I mean, you have these characters which basically have the same name and similarities between them, but they are not the same character. They are not interchangeable. They can't be. You can't basically drag one from one universe to use it in another. And that's the problem with comic books. That's the problem with Western writing. That you have all these interchangeable characters. That you have all these multiverse characters which are absolutely interchangeable. You have the same Peter Parker, the same Bruce Wayne, but different universe. And you can kill them off in one universe and then drag them from another. That's a mistake. That's a problem. That's bad writing. Another example of a multiverse made right, and this one doesn't have recurring characters, is the Myst series. Each world shown there is part of a big multiverse. You have several universes connected in what is described in analogy to a tree with branches. And that's the thing. None of the branches of the tree is identical. The people in one branch is not the same as the people in the other, and you can't replace one with the other. It's in fact part of the plot of the third game, where the main antagonist is motivated by revenge because of the loss of his family, and his reasoning is that there is no other universe where they will ever exist. And that's why he wants revenge, because he knows there are other universes, but none of them is a universe where his family will ever return. The only way to save them was a promise that, according to him, was never fulfilled of re-stabilizing his world, which was made unstable by irresponsible experimenting. And you are shown that the world is not interchangeable. And in fact, from the very beginning of the series, you have, for example, this in the second game, this antagonist called Gehn, who sees himself as a god because he's one of the many who know something called the art, which is this ability of writing books which connect the universes to other universes. Basically, they connect the world where the writer is to another universe. And those who write those books, those who use the art, they basically open portals, but Gehn considers himself a god and starts irresponsibly altering. I think based on the way the story is established, I think that's representative of retcons, because he starts doing something that other users of the art consider taboo, that is altering drastically the description of the book after establishing the link, and that makes the world unstable. That damages the world, and eventually one of the worlds he wrote dies as a consequence of his constant rewriting, because what he was trying to do was writing a book with a world that was identical to the lost civilization of his ancestors, and there was no way. That's an important part. There was no way to make that world, to make that book, to write this book that was identical to the world of his ancestors, because the worlds are not interchangeable. That's a constant message. Worlds are not interchangeable. What you can find are places which are similar, but they won't have the same people, they don't won't have the same civilization. His intent was restoring that civilization, and then he started trying to become a god. And he considered himself a god of all the worlds he connected with his writing, and treated the inhabitants of those worlds as slaves because of his egomania. And that's the thing. I think many writers who consider themselves gods are bad writers, and he was a bad writer. And the reason I say that is because they start doing retcons, irresponsibly altering things, and they start treating, when they deal with multiple universes, they start treating them as interchangeable. And I think that's a problem with comic book writing and with Western writing in general. One example of that is Marvel, DC, and Rick and Morty. The latter, which starts off as a parody of these, but then becomes the same problem. You have multiple universes with multiple versions of the same character, which sometimes are treated as disposable and interchangeable. Literally, one version killing another and taking his place. That's shit. That's bad writing. And as I said, I think that's why Rick and Morty started as a parody of it. I think it started with the intention of a parody. I am not going to, even though I don't like him, I am not going to discard Dan Harmon's intent. I think he intended to make it first a parody of how bad it was with comic books. But since he's not a good writer, and since he basically started pandering to a stupid audience, he started to make the same mistakes he was mocking. Basically, he became his own joke. And that's the problem with this. That's the problem with multiverses. Not that they exist. You can have dozens of interconnected universes. You can even have them interacting with each other and make it good. An example that is really not talked about often in the West of multiple universes interconnected with interaction, constant interaction, is Stargate. Stargate literally is about a huge portal that connects Earth with other planets and other universes, and the people from those planets and universes interacting with each other. And it worked, because the problem is not having multiple universes. It's not knowing how to manage them or treating them as interchangeable. And that's the problem, and that's something I really don't like about comics. When I write, because I do write multiple universes, when I write a new universe, it's not going to be the same as the others. It's going to be a very different universe with a very different history. Even when I write universes which are similar to a real world, I tend to write alternate history, because I like the idea of they are not interchangeable, they are not identical. For example, I don't know, maybe in this world, I don't know, Barack Obama wasn't born, and therefore you didn't have to tolerate Michelle Obama during 8 years. Or for example, I don't know, in this universe, the British Empire wasn't over, and it continued for the rest of history until the present. That's an example. It's not something I have written, but it's an example of what I consider when I am writing alternate history. I don't write directly one-to-one real life Earth. I write alternate history. Or for example, one that I use often is, it's identical in many senses to the chronology of real life, but there is The setting is a country, a fictional country in the middle of nowhere. I don't know, in the middle of the ocean. I don't know, maybe an island country near the Atlantic, for example. It's a fictional place that doesn't exist in real life. I like to do that. Therefore, I can't make the world interchangeable. I can repeat some things. For example, I don't know, a character has the very same name as another, but it's not the same character. It's not, doesn't have the same life, the same background. Probably isn't even the same species. For example, let's say a character from a setting which has elves and the same name appears in a setting where there is only humans, there are no elves, then therefore it's not an elf, it's not interchangeable, it's basically a homage to the previous one, which is, for example, like what Final Fantasy does with some of the characters, that they reappear but they are not exactly the same. For example, many characters which are popular made an appearance again, but not being exactly the same. And that's, for example, something that you can see more in Japanese works. In anime and manga, you see that more often. That you have these characters who appear repeatedly, these themes that repeat. For example, I don't know. For example, in Toriyama's work, sometimes you can see references to other works of him. For example, I don't know, you have this reference to Dragon Ball in one of his other works and things like that, because they are references. They are not necessarily the exact same character interchangeably. And that's the thing. And that's my problem with, for example, with Western comics. I think, because I have noticed a lot more rejection to the idea of a multiverse in recent years. That's why I wanted to make this video. I think the problem is not the multiverse. The problem is that you have these interchangeable Earths in plural, because they don't even bother giving them a proper name. They don't bother giving them a name. It's so uncreative, uninspired, and it's shit. I will put it that way. It's shit. It's horrible writing. Why? I like to give every universe I write a name, even if I don't write it in the book at the end. Even if you don't ever know the name, I try to think of a name for every universe I have ever written. I like to give them a name. The reason is because of the influence of Myst and of Magic the Gathering. There are multiple universes, but each one has a name. And again, Magic the Gathering did it right. It's not the part that they did wrong. The part that they did wrong is more recent. But they had all these multiple universes, none of which is interchangeable with the other, and and every universe has its own name. For example, you have this universe called Ravnica, which is one that influenced me a lot, which is heavily inspired in medieval Russia, and you have all these like guilds fighting for control of the setting. You have Mirrodin, which is an artificial universe made by a golem, which then abandons the world and everything goes to shit. You have Dominaria, which is basically the central universe in the setting. You have Amonkhet, which is based in the mythology of ancient Egypt. Innistrad, which looks basically like Gothic Europe and the Gothic Americas, with all these vampires and scarecrows and things like that. You have these other worlds which have each their own theme, their own elements. I don't remember all the names, but for example, Kamigawa, which is a very divisive one, which had a theme of feudal Japan, and they have their own characters, their own history. They are not the same. They are not interchangeable. There are species which are found in one and not in another, and vice versa. And that's the thing. each one has its own name, each one has its own history, each one has its own characters. And that's the difference with, for example, Marvel and DC, where you have all these universes that are treated as interchangeable, as the same universe all over again. And they suck. They suck, being honest. They suck, they are awful. You have Earth B, Earth C, Earth Alpha, Earth Delta. That sucks. Why do they have to be called Earth? Why do they have to be entirely identical? I think you can make a whole separate universe with its own Spider-Man. That's not the problem. The problem is when it's the same Peter Parker or Miles Morales. Miles Morales sucks, by the way. With the same suit and the same abilities and the same villains and the same city, living in the same fucking New York, or I think it's California where they said Miles Morales, living in the same place, with the same people, with the same characters, everything identical. That's bad. I think that's bad. And one of the problems I think that causes this is that you don't have the same writers, and you don't have really that many talented writers, and that you don't have a coherent story. And that led to writers basically writing whatever they wanted, and that's a big problem. And they basically just slap the same characters with whatever they wanted to make. The same name of the character, same things, everything is the same. Instead of making a recurring theme, they made the same character but more and more incoherent. And the fact that they don't even bother to name their universes. No, they are just Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 2020, Earth Earth Alpha Null. I don't know. It's shit. I think it's shit. That's the thing. I think it's bad. Because you have all these... They are devoid of creativity and love. You have all these universes that were not given love, that were not developed to be their own world. The problem is not that they are interconnected. It's that they are not creative. And that they are interchangeable. That they are not unique. That they are not authentic. That they are not their own. That they are basically just another universe based on real life Earth, with the same history, the same background, but in this specific universe, Peter Parker gets cocked when he was 15, and in this one when he was 20. That's the only difference, because they always want to make Peter Parker a fucking cock. They hate Peter Parker, so they do that. But that's the thing. They suck because they are worse than fanfics. That's the thing. The whole multiverse thing has diminished the quality to the point that it's worse than fanfics. Fanfics have inconsistencies as a result of the original author not being present, because, well, when you have too many chefs in the kitchen, you will get mistakes. Fanfics are inconsistent because no matter how well-meaning, the fanfic author probably doesn't understand the author's vision. Fanfics are often treated as low quality because of those inconsistencies and incoherences. Using the term fanfic level writing is an insult. It's basically saying your writing is bad. I find it funny that sometimes people use it as an insult to original works. They call an entirely original setting as fanfic as an insult, and that's not what a fanfic is. Because the insult has cemented to the point that basically it's used as an insult even to new worlds with no pre-existing source to derivate from. But that's the thing. Here you have a source. They are derivative. That's the problem with all these comics. They are entirely derivative. They are functionally fanfics, and they are not good fanfics. That's why you have this way of mismanaging universes. The problem is not multiverses. The problem is the lack of creativity, the lack of affection to the setting, the lack of respect, the lack of originality, and the fact that they treat them as interchangeable. And people now hate the idea of having multiple universes because of that. I think the idea is good. I think the idea is good, and there are authors who have made it work, even with recurring and nearly interchangeable, nearly, not entirely interchangeable, but nearly interchangeable characters. For example, the Clamp, which is this circle of writers, this Japanese circle of writers. They make settings which have characters that are nearly interchangeable, but they have enough differences to make them not the same. The Sakura of Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicles and the Sakura of Card Captors is not the same Sakura. That's the thing. They are not interchangeable. They look the same, they have similarities in personality, but they are not interchangeable. You can't just grab one from one setting and use it in another. That's the opposite to what Marvel does. An example of that was the Avengers Endgame film, where you basically had a character from one universe replacing one from the other universe who died. That's an insult to the audience, I think. That's horrible. That sucks. Making them interchangeable is the problem here, not that you have multiple universes. And I think people rejecting the idea of writing multiple universes interconnected is unfortunate. I don't have an issue with it happening. But the real problem here is when you treat them as interchangeable, and when you do reboots, and when you do resets, and when you basically recycle the same universe all over again just to rewrite it entirely, like a retcon, like what Gehn did with his writing in the Mist series. Well, that's it for today. Have a good one.